Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
When Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home, and many gathered together so that there was no more room, not even at the door. He was preaching the word to them, and they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they moved to the roof from above him. And when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." And that is Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. I'm your host, Sandra Flach. And that was a little bit of a longer scripture than I normally open this show with, but I believe that this scripture gives us a glimpse into what happens when people who care step in and care for those who are vulnerable, and how it can be life transforming. And that is what we're going to be talking about today with our guest. So I'm thrilled that you are here and listening. We have, I'm so excited about our guest. We've had her on a couple of times over the years, back in the early days. Maybe it's been 4 years since she was on last, but she has a new book out. It is an excellent book, an excellent resource, and I cannot wait to talk about it with her. But first, we have to do some housekeeping and, those preliminary things that we always have to get to as podcasters. And really, because I want to share some valuable resources with you that we have for you. Especially if you are raising children who have been prenatally exposed to alcohol or drugs, whether or not you're really sure about that, whether or not you have or your kiddos have a diagnosis, we have some resources, because prenatal exposure adds next level trauma to trauma that we're already working with our children and praying that they heal from, and supporting them and bringing them to healing. So we as caregivers need some support and some help, because it's a hard journey. So one of the things that we have for you is our faith-based support group for parents and caregivers who are on this journey. So check out this commercial about our group, and I'll see you on the other side.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond, invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets Neurobehavioral Model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphansny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphansny.org/hope-community.
So I always remind our listeners that I talk about FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, a lot on this show, but it's not a podcast solely about that. It's a podcast for parents and caregivers who are on this journey, but FASD it affects a vast majority of children that we are caring for. And I found in my journey, there just wasn't resources out there for me in the early days to help us parent our kids, support our kids, for us to learn and understand what was really going on. And we want to provide those resources with you because, like I said, it is so highly prevalent. The research now is telling us that FASD is the leading cause of developmental and learning disabilities worldwide. And we talk a lot about 1 in 20 school-age children here in the United States have been prenatally exposed. Most are not actually diagnosed, or they're not diagnosed accurately. It's more prevalent than autism. And I believe in these years post-COVID, where drinking among women during 2020 increased significantly, and so did pregnancies. Our school systems are just now seeing the effect of that. So, we want to equip you because this is so prevalent. And like I said, it's so hard to get our kids diagnosed. And if we're in this adoption and foster care space, we may not even know the history, or sometimes we're even told, oh no, none of that. There was no alcohol, but we can find out later that there actually was. So regardless, you need to be educated on it. You need to be equipped for it. And the parenting strategies that I teach, the neurobehavioral model that I teach is relevant and helpful whether or not your kiddos have been prenatally exposed. So I've lived this journey for many, many years now. My youngest two boys, 19 and 21 now, diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome when they were little. And we became trauma informed because the pediatrician, the developmental pediatrician who diagnosed our boys basically gave us a pamphlet on ADHD, diagnosed FAS, gave us a pamphlet on ADHD, and then, have a nice day. There was nothing else out there. So it was rough. And, we muddled through the connected parenting strategies. TBRI definitely helped, and I highly recommend, but you do reach a point where it's not enough, especially when you get to those teenage years. So we want to make sure that we're offering you those resources. So in addition to the support group that we just talked about, that you just heard about, I also do one-on-one parent coaching that I do through Zoom. If you're interested in something like that, as well as every month I offer a variety of different FASD workshops. The intro to FASD is an hour to 90 minutes, depending on how much Q&A we do. It is free. I offer that at least once every month. And then I also do a 3-hour, goes deeper than just the intro. And then about once or twice a year, I offer the deep dive, which is 18 hours worth of content. So there's lots of options. We have a whole bunch on the calendar for October and November. So visit our website if you're interested in any of this training. You would go to justicefororphans.ny.org, click on training at the top of the page, and you'll see the drop down for FASD and for registration, and you can get all the information there and sign up for whatever you are interested in signing up for. I will let you know that the support group, we have scholarships for that. It's a minimal fee of $15 a month, and you get a ton of resources and support with that. However, we never would want that to impede anybody being able to get the help and support that they need. So we do have scholarships. So let us know if that is something that you would like to partake in. So let's see, where are we at now? We have all kinds of information for you here. I want to make sure that I don't skip over anything. My blog, sandraflach.com. I have a whole series of blog posts on the primary symptoms of FASD. So if you want to read and check out my blog, you can do that on my website. Also, I am going to be in Chicago, October 24th through the 26th. For the Replanted Conference. I'm so excited. This is my first time getting to finally go to Replanted. It's been on my list, my to-do list for many years now, but I'm going to be teaching a breakout session on FASD. And, as you're listening to this, if you're looking for a conference that's more like a retreat in a way, something that's going to help you, there's fabulous training, so many amazing people in the adoption and foster care Christian community is, they're speaking and they're teaching. So I highly recommend that you check it out. You can find it at Replanted Conference. You can Google that. And I will be there. So if any of you are planning on being there, please, find me so we can connect. I would love that. I'm going to have a high top table with some resources. And I'm teaching the breakout session. So I hope that if you're going, or if you're considering going, this will get you to take that next step. And I will see you in Chicago later this month. And of course, as always, subscribe, follow this podcast. If you listen on Apple, leave a review. And we also have the YouTube channel where all of the video versions of this podcast live. And that is the Justice for Orphans YouTube channel. So I hope that you will check that out. So all of those things going on. I hope that you'll check it out. Let me know if you're interested in any of those things. But I'm so excited to bring you our guest today. I have back Jayne Schooler. Jayne is recognized nationally and internationally as an expert in adoption, foster care, and trauma-informed care. She has been a child welfare trainer for more than 35 years and is an author or co-author of 8 books. She and her late husband, David, authored the brand new book, Caring for Kids from Hard Places, How to Help Children and Teens with a Traumatic Past, published by Focus on the Family, just out there. It's a phenomenal book. Please welcome my friend, Jayne Schooler. Yay! Welcome, Jayne.
Thank you, Sandra, for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you back. It's been a while.
Yes.
So much going on, but I want to talk about this amazing book. But first, I do want to extend my condolences for the loss of your precious husband, David, ministry partner all of these years. A lot of changes going on. I know you downsized your home and moved recently. So how are you doing?
Well, you probably shouldn't ask me that question. Every day is a different day.
Yeah.
And most of the time I'm doing okay. I got a lot of family support, work. God just seems to give me supernatural energy when I need it and strength. I know He would want me to keep showing up. So that's what I do. Keep showing up.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. So together, you and David wrote your new book, Caring for Kids from Hard Places. He unexpectedly passed before it was in your hands, right? The book?
Right. Yes, he got sick in January. Pancreatic cancer took him in under 3 weeks.
Wow.
And he saw the cover of the book, but he never got to hold the book in his hands. I've laid it on his resting place in the cemetery in a plastic box. I thought it was going to be watertight. It was supposed to be. And it was watertight, but it didn't keep the sun out from fading it. So anyway, I didn't think about that, but
Yeah.
we'll do a redo on that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. You had no time to prepare, essentially 3 weeks.
No, we didn't. But at the same time, I had more time than some people that lose them in a car accident. Something like that. So we had time, and it was a great time of family gathering around. We had family in our home the last 10 days. He came home on hospice, family from out of state, and our church family. So our home had probably 10 or 12 people in it every day from 10 o'clock in the morning till we had communion by his bedside at 8 p.m. every night, and that's when everybody left. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, you're in my prayers, and I know when I saw that on social media, I was like, my heart just stopped because it was so fast and heartbreaking. So you're in our prayers, but you continue the work that you both have just poured your lives into all of these years. And I ordered your book, and as soon as I heard about it and as soon as it came out, I'm like, I'm getting that book. And I love it. And it is such a vitally needed resource, especially for, churches and Christian schools. And I kept thinking homeschool co-ops and any place where children are, right? Of course, parents, but, parents in this space, adoption and foster care, most of us have read The Connected Child. Most of us have read, the different books, and we know we need to become trauma informed. So parents and caregivers might be, but then we bring our kids to church. We send them to VBS or to youth group or to, children's church, that kind of thing, or homeschool co-ops and Christian schools. And it's like nobody else out there really is trauma informed. But yet they're, spending time with our kids and not understanding what all of those big behaviors are all about. So I was thrilled because as I read this book, I'm like, everybody needs one of these books, everybody who's working with kids. So what inspired you and David to write Caring for Kids from Hard Places?
Well, Sandra, this started actually quite a while ago, if I can share with that. But
Yeah.
what the situation was, it was a number of years ago, I was substituting in a children's ministry. And these two little guys came in. They were probably 7 or 8. And I didn't have the vocabulary then. That tells you how long ago it was. But now I would say they were very dysregulated. Well,
Mm.
we didn't get them under control. I didn't have the skills then, and the Sunday school teacher didn't. And within 20 minutes of their arrival, he kicked them out and told them to go find whoever they came with because someone brought them.
Mm.
Well, later that day, I found out that they had been witnesses to domestic violence, 2 o'clock in the morning. The police had been at their house. They still got up and came to church. And I said, we've got to do better. So
Mm.
I began a search, and that's how our trauma training kind of developed to get into churches. And as a result, Dave and I had a real passion to get the message into churches because we saw every day, every Sunday, the need for it, in children and adults both. So it came out of observation. Lord, use us to fill a need here. And we went from
Mm.
there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And as our churches, have become filled with children that have come through adoption, foster care, kinship care, and even it doesn't even have to be in situations like that. There's trauma everywhere, all kinds. Adults with trauma, right? But to understand and be trauma informed and equipped and to train staff to understand that, I think is a huge game changer for our churches. So I so appreciate that this is a resource for that. And I know in your book you unpack what adverse childhood experiences are, ACEs.
Right.
And this isn't something that, I would think church staff would
Oh,
routinely
they
get
don't.
trained in. So would you explain what ACEs are, and unpack them a little bit for our audience in case they don't understand exactly what that term means?
Sure. ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, it was rooted in, and I don't know if you know the history, you probably do, of
A little
ACEs,
bit.
but Dr. Vincent Folletti was worked in an obese clinic in, I believe, California, not sure. And I'm talking with people that were 300, 400, 500 pounds overweight. And he began working with them, and they had great success until they got near their goal. And then they quit and they gained their weight back. And he said, so there's a problem here. I want to investigate that. So this all ACE happened by mistake. He began interviewing his patients. And I think the first patient was Ruth. I don't remember her name exactly. But so he said, Ruth, how much did you weigh when you were born? How much did you weigh when you started kindergarten? How much did you weigh when you started high school? And then he misspoke. Instead of saying, how old were you when you became sexually active? He said, how much did you weigh when you became sexually active? And she said, 40 pounds. 40, no, I think you misunderstood my question. She said, no, I didn't. 40 pounds. It was my father. And so he
Mm.
began asking all these other questions of his clients and to realize they all came from a history of severe child abuse,
Mm.
particularly in the first 5 years.
Mm.
So they conducted that study originally on 17,000 people, but it looks at different areas of life, and I'm grabbing that right now. Um, they look at what happened to you as a child in terms of abuse and neglect. There are 5 questions. And then there are 5 questions about what happened at the home. For example, did you observe your mother or father being pushed, grabbed, slapped? Or did you live with anyone who had a problem drinking? Anyway, so what they then developed was what they call the ACE pyramid. Adverse childhood experiences lead to disrupted neurodevelopment. And
Mhm.
then we go into social, emotional, cognitive impairment, high risk behaviors, particularly in the teen years,
Mhm.
because they don't have a filter, disability and disease, and potentially early death because
Yeah.
of all that. So um, people are now using that. They have even developed, although I've not seen it, a baby ACE score
Mm.
to
Yeah.
see what it, yeah. So they know what happens in those early months is absolutely critical too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating because if you think about, especially this population of children who are in adoptive placements in foster care system, whether they were, in overseas orphanages or, whatever had happened to them, even just domestic adoption, right? There's that experience, those experiences that are very common, that we can say that our kids have experienced these adverse childhood experiences, which changes so much about them. And I know that neurodevelopment part, right? The brain is changed, and then we see behaviors. And when we just see behaviors, we just often think, a person is on purpose choosing these,
Right.
making these poor choices and not really understanding that there's been a profound impact on them from the abuse that they suffered, the trauma, that they suffer themselves, that they witnessed. And it really does change everything. So educating anybody working with
Oh, yeah.
children is so, so important. And there's hope for our kids, right? And I know your book points to that as well, because there's so much that we can all do
Right.
to help children. So one of the things I loved is you guys talk about in the book the power of the middle circle.
Yes.
So
Yes.
can you share a little bit about that with us?
Well, that was David's, and I thought he's been sharing it as part of our trauma-free world training for years. But when you think about it, if I had a drawing here, I would have a circle at the bottom, and that would represent a child who has had a lot of bad things happen and good things that did not. And he's angry and frustrated. So then at the top of a page, I would have another circle, and that is the resources this child needs. And then we say, well, what's the problem? Well, there's a gap there. And
Mhm.
so we got to fill that in with the middle circle, who could be the caregiver, the coach, the parent, anybody that Sunday school teacher, children's ministry person,
Yeah.
anybody that can connect to that child and help bring resources into their life. Anybody can be a middle circle in the life of another. And also, the cool thing about this is exactly what God did for us. Here
Mm.
we are, all down here, a big mess. God is up here, and He sent Jesus as our middle circle. And so that's the beauty of it. Jesus is our connector to God, our middle circle that brings the
Yeah.
resources God had for us to us.
Yeah. And I opened the show with the scripture from Luke where the four friends lower their friend, the paralytic, down through the roof so he could be healed by Jesus. So those four friends were middle circle friends.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They sure were. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I love that. So we all can be middle circle friends, middle circle people in the lives of children. So Jayne, share with us why it's so important to create trauma-informed environments in our churches and schools and homes, places for kids to heal.
Well, good friends of mine, I'm sure you probably know them, Harold and Wendy Parks from Canada.
Yes, yes.
When we were interviewing them for the book, they both said something that churches have to become a place that welcome in the messy.
Mm,
But
yeah.
before we welcome in those messy situations, we have to prepare ourselves. We have to understand what happens to people, and we have to understand what we can do to help and what we can do about it. We have to learn strategies to intervene with that little boy in the classroom who's melting down because the room is too loud or the lights are too bright.
Mm,
Or something, smell has triggered something that brought a negative abusive memory, and he's down on the floor with a meltdown. So, how do you deal with a child with a meltdown? what do you do? So we have to equip our people with those skills because we want to. Who would Jesus welcome in? He would welcome in the messy.
Yeah.
And we're all messy. The reality is we're all messy. And sometimes with our kids, it's easier to think of this as a bad kid than what has
Mhm.
happened to him to cause it.
Yeah, because our churches are filled with messy adults, right?
Mhm.
And we expect broken people to come in, but then when it's children, we just expect children to behave,
Right.
and not really understanding that, those messy adults probably were once messy children, right?
Absolutely. And just passed it on down. Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 And if our churches understand that there are so many wounded adults who have unresolved trauma.
Mhm.
That's what
Yeah.
David focus was. He spent probably after he left full-time ministry and after we stopped traveling. Well, he even did it while we were traveling, though. Probably 15 to 20 hours of counseling a week for which he never charged a dime. Um,
Mm.
Working with adults who had this traumatic history they never talked about. And these people had been in our churches and sitting for decades and never
Yeah.
been able to deal with it. They never felt an environment that would understand.
Yeah.
So,
And when it comes to our children, and so many families now in churches across the country are adopting, they're fostering, and how many grandparents are raising grandchildren or other relative, right? Um, and it's like it's another ministry. I see it as another ministry where you have these parents and caregivers who are exhausted and struggling, and they need to be in church. They want to be in church, and they're bringing their children in, and then they're getting called out because,
oh yeah. See
of the
their number
behaviors.
come on the screen.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And I had a precious mom. I had a precious mama one day. And it was before church even started. I saw her, and they weren't super regular attenders because it was always hard. And I, happened to stop and chat with her, and tears in her eyes. She was like, I need to be here. But
Hmm.
she also said, I never make it through a service. And I looked for her at the end of the service and gone. So, and that's where I was like, we need to do better. We need to do better for the kids, and we need to do better for their caregivers because, we all need support on this journey. So it's so important. And I see your book as a key to being able to equip, especially churches. I think of churches, but there's a lot of other environments too where we could do better equipping those who are working with kids to better understand the impacts of trauma.
Oh, yes. I was just talking last week with a large church in our Dayton area who are struggling with an influx of difficult kids. And I said, have you ever thought of doing a mentor program? This is a large church.
Mhm.
Setting up a consistent mentor buddy for that one difficult or two difficult kids, that mentor makes a 6 month commitment to be with that youngster in children's church or wherever they are, so the mother or dad doesn't have to get called out. The mentor's been trained, developing a relationship, and stays with that kid and walks them through every Sunday. So we never thought about that. I said
Mm.
that's going to keep your parents in church, and that's
Yes.
build your congregation. So
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know Ryan and Kayla North. They're
sure,
precious. So our church actually had them in a couple of months ago, because they do a training, made to connect to equip,
sure.
children's ministry leaders and folks too. So it's so vitally necessary. And we actually gave away a couple copies of your book
Oh, good.
at that event to parents, and we
Good.
highly recommended it because, that's the next step, right? We need to, if they could all just read this book and come to understand the impacts, and that this is just it's not children who are on purpose, misbehaving, right? Because behavior is communication.
Right,
And we need to be able to really train. It's not the fault of the church staff. They just have not been trained, and there really hasn't been an understanding until recently that they need to be trained in trauma. Um,
right.
and your book is going to go a long way to helping that. So I'm
One
so
of the things
blessed.
that I have really enjoyed, I just started the first time through this book. I've been doing book clubs for about 2 years and different books, and I just started doing ours. And I think that's a great thing for a church staff.
Yes.
Let's read this book and meet together. for a half hour once a week, talk about the book till you finish the book. Because the more you talk about it, the more it's going to become part of you.
Yeah. Yes. And you very creatively at the end of each chapter, you've got strategies and discussion questions. So it can be used
Right.
as a tool, to bring your staff together and regularly meet and discuss each chapter. So
Yes.
yeah, that was a great idea. Brilliant. I'm sure that was your that was your plan.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that was my hope, yes,
yeah,
that
yeah.
people would use that for that very reason. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely an excellent resource for that. So Jayne, as I'm a parent of 5 adopted children. Now all young adults are, youngest 2 young adults are diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome, which is a trauma really that occurred in
Right.
utero, right? Plus they were in a Eastern European orphanage for a number of years during those key developmental years. So, um, you know, I live every day knowing that my boys' brains are different, right? They work
Right.
differently because of that early trauma. Would you comment on the impact trauma has on the brain and how, that's the reason for the behaviors or symptoms of the impact of that trauma?
Sure. Well, when a child lives in, there's another author, Sandra, that I love. Her last name is Nakasawa. She wrote the book Childhood Disrupted. It's an amazing book. But she uses the term cuts, chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress. So
Mm,
it's these toxic chemicals that are, and she used the word marinate. And when your brain marinates in toxic stress, it has a big impact.
yeah.
And I've spent a lot of time studying under Dr. Karen Purvis and trust-based
Mm,
relational intervention. And when we think of cuts, it impacts the body, the toxic chemicals, the brain.
mhm.
I'm going to share a real quick story in a minute about our biology. It impacts our belief system, and therefore, it's going to impact our brain. It as and Dr. Purvis calls it the 5 Bs.
Mm,
But I had a dear friend that actually she grew to be a friend. I had her senior year in high school when I was teaching at our Christian school. And anyway, we didn't know anything about her. She grew up in our church. My husband was a pastor. And when she was in her early 30s, her life began to cave in.
mm,
And so she came to David, and what was revealed was she had dissociated memories of being trafficked by her grandfather
mm,
for 7 years. It was horrendous. But anyway, fast forward, she's done a lot of healing. But when she was 48, she diagnosed with cancer. And so she went to, I didn't know these people existed, an genetic oncologist that studied the genetics related. Anyway, he didn't know her history and simply asked her, do you did you have a history of child? No, his words were you stuck in childhood trauma? And she said, yes, but how did you know? It's clear down to the cellular level.
wow.
He's still at that point of her life. So it's just a fascinating when you get into that depth of study of what trauma becomes part of your whole circulation when you think of
Yeah.
isn't that amazing? Now, Robin tells her story all the time. I used her name because she has spoken to thousands of people. It's not a secret, but she has quite a story of recovery and healing, both physically from the cancer and from her trauma.
Wow.
But
Love that.
yeah,
Yeah. But it is eye-opening. And in the other book you mentioned where, marinating in that, it
marinate.
does right down to the cellular level. It soaks, trauma soaks a child to the core, right?
Right. And changes them from what
Yeah.
God's original purpose, if I can say that, but he can bring healing and the brain
Mm,
heals. We know the brain heals.
yeah.
So there is hope. If there wasn't hope, we wouldn't need to be doing all of this.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah, and our families need that hope.
Right,
But there's a lot of work involved in that, and
right.
you kind of unpack some of that in your book. So let's talk about felt safety for a moment, right? What is felt safety, and why does that matter in a child?
Well, our kids who have grown up in cuts, their life experiences, they have never felt safe. There
Right.
might be moments that they have, but overall, they have not felt safe because their environment is totally unpredictable. Is dad going to come in drunk, or is mom going to come in on drugs and just lay on the couch? Am I going to get slapped around tonight? Their environment is totally unsafe for them. So they live in their fear brain. So we have to be able to create environments there where children feel safe.
Yeah.
And there's lots of techniques and strategies to do that. In children's ministry, two simple things is to make sure our kids have hydration and healthy snacks.
Hmm.
Our local church has stopped bringing in donuts every Sunday. I said, please don't do that. Let's get healthy snacks in here. And
Yeah.
so, to a large degree, they've stopped doing that. Every once in a while, somebody will sneak in a donut or two,
Mhm.
but hydration and healthy nutrition are two simple things that children's ministries can do.
Yeah. And other things too. So there was some other techniques. I know you unpacked them in your book. So the snacks and the healthy snacks and hydration, water, managing transitions is a big one.
Oh, yeah, you don't. Okay, now we're going to stop this and go to this. No, I think we all need transitions.
Hmm.
So you might say in 5 minutes, we're going to quit coloring and we're going to go over to our Bible lesson. In 3 minutes, we're going to in 1 minute. Managing transitions, there are things that kids' brains need.
Yeah.
They don't have the cognitive flexibility to make change real easily, so they need that. Also, I tell Sunday school and children's minister staff, never touch a child you don't know without their permission,
Yeah.
ever. And in fact, just recently we had a new family at our church. And there was another little girl came running up to me. I've known her for 3 years. She's 6 years old. I get a hug from her every Sunday. And this 3-year-old boy was watching. And I said, honey, I don't know you well enough to give you a hug this Sunday, but could I have a high five? And he said, okay. I got a high five. And I said, next week I'll ask your mommy about giving you a side hug. But I didn't know him. I could have reached out and hugged him. He wanted a hug. But I said, honey, I don't know you. So
Mm.
I want you to be safe. So anyway, that's
Yeah.
what child safety is about. And it's just a matter of living that way when you're in that environment, thinking in those terms.
Yeah. I love that. And sensory is another one because I don't think our churches really understand, and even schools, how our kids are affected when there's all of that, crazy stimulation, right? The sensory
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
going on.
They don't. And I'm still amazed today the number of foster and adoptive parents who don't know. It's not offered as a major training thing in our Ohio training system. But 80% of kids who come through cuts have sensory related issues.
Yeah.
Many of those are undiagnosed. So it looks like bad behavior with this kid on the floor with a meltdown when it's been a reaction to too much noise.
Yeah.
I think Chuck E. Cheese's um, I think it was created by someone that wanted to get back at parents because it's a place on earth. But that's the worst place to take a kid with sensory issues. And if a parent doesn't know, it looks like a kid is trying to ruin the evening when that's not it at all.
Right. Yeah. So I don't think even public schools, understand the sensory piece because I went into Grandparents' Day in one of my grandkids' classes. He was first grade. I think he was 6 years old. And we got to do a craft and read a story, and we had all these little stations. But I just remember sitting there on the floor and looking around, and every square inch of every wall was covered in different black and white pattern
Oh, wow.
pieces of paper. It was like the teacher had wallpapered, and it wasn't the same pattern. It was like pieces of paper that had different black and white patterns every square inch. And it was overwhelming to me. And I don't really have sensory challenges. But I remember thinking, I wonder how the kids in this classroom are doing, or if any of the kids in this classroom have sensory issues, because this is way overstimulating.
I'd get vertigo probably. Oh,
Yeah, it was
gosh, yeah.
crazy. But loud noises. One of my boys is 19 and he does not like loud. There's restaurants we don't go in because the acoustics are really bad, and when it's
Oh, yeah.
busy, it is so loud. And he'll say, I can't go in there. So we just avoid those restaurants. But
Sure.
we have to be sensitive to understand that, it's a real thing with our kids, and they can very easily become dysregulated, and they might not be able to say, this is giving me sensory overload. We kind of have to read the cues and understand it to be able to support them better. But, even that, and, having classrooms where the music isn't too loud and there's, not too many things going on and it's not so busy on the walls and that kind of thing.
It's really critically important, I think, for all of our kids.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So in addition to being able to use some of those things, and you break down, you go over all of these things in depth in your book. We're just touching on them here, but connection, right, is another one. Connection and attachment between the parent and caregiver and the child, key to the child's healing. So what does it look like to build connection in other environments? Like we get that when, it's the parent or the caregiver and the child, but what about in children's ministry or, Sunday school, VBS, those kinds of things? How can we build connection with kiddos there?
Well, that's a fun topic to talk about. There's so many things that you can talk about, but if I'm in children ministry and I'm working with the younger ones, I kind of laugh. I can get down, but I can't get up at this point in my age. I get down on their level. New kids coming in, and I look them in the eye and I welcome them there. I use their name. I make a mental note to remember their name. And the first experience in that classroom is going to set the stage for that little one. So that's a form of connection. If I have a new youngster in the classroom, and maybe I have on a yellow blouse, and that youngster has on a yellow shirt or blouse, say, hey, you know what? We're matching today. We both have on yellow, just looking for places to connect. I am intentional about making those kind of connections. So, so many things. I think of character praise, praising our kids. Sometimes their accomplishments are not that wonderful, but we look for character praise, like thank you for being so kind to pick up Susie's papers off the floor, or those kind of things, or thank you for offering your crayon to Johnny when he couldn't find his red crayon. So character praise is another great way to connect. Making sure our kids have voice, making sure they're heard, and what they say is validated. And if a youngster is telling us something very serious, that we need to stop the world if we can, get down on their level and listen. And it might be we may have to pull them over to the side. Hopefully, you have enough staff in a children's minute, which is a challenge. I get that, that you can do that. But those are just a few simple ways to start building connection. And Sandra, one of the best ones is having an attitude of playfulness.
Yeah.
The key to a kid's heart is play, or a playful attitude. We were over in Kyrgyzstan, and there was this caretaker in a girls' dorm at Salvation Army Orphanage, and she looked like a military sergeant. And she informed us that she did not play. She's not going to go out there and play soccer with those girls. And I said, okay, that's okay. And then I started talking about playfulness, and I saw her teasing her staff and laughing. I said, no, you may not play soccer, but you have an attitude of playfulness. And that's what our kids need.
Yeah. And play disarms fear also.
It does. It absolutely does.
Yeah. I learned that from Dr. Purvis too.
Yes. Oh, yeah. What we all have learned from her. What a legacy. Yes.
Yes. Yes. In fact, her quote, you have a quote in your book, and it's one of Dr. Purvis's quotes. Behavior is the language of children who have lost their voice. And you just mentioned, right, we need to be able to give them voice. So, what are some ways that, church ministry leaders and staff and volunteers and teachers, how can they do that? How can staff and volunteers, what do they do with these challenging behaviors, and how do we give them voice?
Well, let me share something real quick. David kind of shortened that little phrase from Dr. Purvis, and he said, behavior is vocabulary. And it is. So first of all, we have to learn how to look behind the behavior to the need. Often we get stuck in just the behavior, and we react to that instead of respond to the need. So we look at behavior, and it's it's a training issue. It's a awareness issue that I see a youngster misbehaving. He may have just thrown something across the room.
Mhm.
Okay, what might be the need behind that behavior? Maybe he was extremely frustrated with whatever that object was. Maybe he was trying to put something together, so he was frustrated, so he threw it. Or maybe he came and had not had much sleep that night before and he was hungry and he just reached the wall and he threw it, you know. So we've got to start looking
Yeah.
behind the behavior if we can. I think another thing is if you have children that are known to be difficult, that we ask the parents when they bring them, any special thing I need to know this morning? How did he
Mhm.
sleep last night? How did he eat? Did he eat breakfast? Those kind of simple things that
Yeah.
can set the course for the day.
Yeah.
And we look for areas to connect. One of my favorite stories in the book is a story about bringing the football.
Mm.
And this happened in Greenville. And we were assigned to teach a church ministry staff 1 hour on trauma training. And during the class, there was a gentleman in the back, and he was texting on his phone. And I thought he was kind of a hostage. It was required, they had to be there. And so he came up at the class and he said, I want you to know this 1 hour changed my life. And he said, I have a little boy that comes into our Sunday school. And frankly, I'm glad the days he doesn't come because he's so difficult. Well, we kick him out. After the first 10 minutes, he sits in the hall the whole time. And today I learned if he comes in dysregulated, and he said, that's a new word for me. I need to learn to connect with him. And I know he loves football. So
Mm.
I was texting my wife to bring the football.
Mm.
Because when he comes today and I begin to see him escalate, Matthew and I are going to go out and throw the football
Yeah.
and get him calmed down. And I said, thought to myself, you weren't texting your wife to bring a football. You were texting your wife to change a life.
Yeah.
And that's exactly, and he was a changed man. And Matthew's experience from that day on forward is going to be different.
Yeah, I love that. And it is the behaviors because we're sort of, we think, prior to becoming trauma informed, prior to understanding all this, we just think behaviors are willful disobedience, right? That need to be
Right.
punished or disciplined or corrected or whatever. And that gets us nowhere with these kids. And I know in the training that I've had for my boys with the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, understanding the symptoms of that, and all of the symptoms are behavioral. But when you
Sure.
understand that they have a brain difference and it's the way their brain works differently is what's driving these behaviors, how can we support and accommodate them? It's a life changer. It's a game changer with our kids.
Sure. And simply asking a youngster that is misbehaving, can you getting down their level and say, use your words, not your behavior.
Yeah.
What do you need? Sometimes we go into these long lectures when kids are misbehaving, and according to Dr. Purvis, after 14 words, the kids are gone anyway. So
Yeah.
cut out the lectures, make it
Yeah.
short and sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've learned that because my boys both have sensory processing challenges. So they're not catching every word. And I was the parent that liked to give the very wordy lectures when I disciplined. And when and I learned somewhere along the line that is like they catch every third word that you say, or they just catch the last few words out of all those words you just spewed
Yeah.
out at them. They just caught the last few words, and it's like, what's the point? So the point
Yes.
is short and sweet and to the point, and not barrage them with all those words because they're not going to catch them all anyway.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So goodness, we could talk about so many other things here. Um, how about this one? Our churches and communities are filled with, we talked about this a little bit earlier with adults who've also, have trauma histories themselves. And we as parents and caregivers, we may have trauma
Mm.
history. So what do we need to do in order to better provide, safe healing places for children with trauma in our churches?
Um, Well, what we've talked about is creating that environment where
Yeah.
children know that they're welcome. That parents know their children are welcome here.
Mhm.
That we train a staff to be equipped for those difficult situations that come. we train a staff to understand their wounded adults in our congregation who is telling us by their behavior there's something going on, and to learn to look into the meaning and not the behavior, even of our adults. There's a beautiful story in the book by my friend Kim Bato, and she tells the story of little Louis. Louis was 5 years old. He came to their children's ministry. He wasn't in the room for 3 to 5 minutes when she was head of the children's ministry department, so she wasn't in there, but she gets his call, come quickly, we need help with Louis. Louis was throwing chairs all over and swearing in words that she hadn't heard, probably. Anyway, so Kim comes in, she takes Louis out, and they sit on the floor. This kid is 5 years old. And she started asking him a question, and he said, "Shut up." And she said, "I will do what you ask if you ask me with respect. Could you ask me to please stop talking?" And he said, "Okay, please stop talking." So they sat there in silence. In a few minutes, he started talking. So they talked back and forth, and she was getting to know Louis. After church, his mom came around the corner, and her head fell because she saw Louis. She said, "This happens every place we go. We won't be back next week." And Kim immediately said, "Hang on a minute, hang on a minute." And she said, "Hang on a minute here. I want to talk to you." So Louis was calmed down. He went in the class, and she said, "My first question I need to ask you is, what does Louis need to feel safe in our children's ministry?" And Al spewed Louis' story, how he had witnessed his father murdered in front of him not a year before, and all the trauma that he had been through. Because that mom took her time to listen, and that's what we can do with a lot of these families that are in crisis. Listen. That mom stayed in church. She ended up on their tech team at this large church. Louis grew up in children's ministry. They could have walked away again, but they didn't. So,
Yeah. And that's why it's so important that our churches receive training and understand this, because we can not only, make it safe spaces for our kids, but your congregation can grow. You just have to be
absolutely.
trauma informed. And that is, your book is a way for churches to become trauma informed. So I love it. I keep saying that as a resource
I appreciate it. I deeply
yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I believe it, because you should, here's my book. Look at how it is all
Curled up. It's all curled up, and
It
I love it when things are like that.
and because underlined and highlighted and all that, because this is so important.
Yes.
So I'm thrilled that we're having this conversation. So you also included, and I know how important this is, a whole chapter on soul care. So why did you include that?
Well, we used to say self-care.
Right.
That it's every ministry, because there's so many people in ministry who experience secondary trauma because of the people they're working with, or the burnout, they're worn out, and because they've not taken the time to take care of their life. And soul care is absolutely very important. It starts with becoming aware of ourselves and what our own history is. It continues by seeking the help we need. And then finding areas where we have some real deficits. Maybe I don't give myself emotional rest. It means I wear masks all the time, and therefore those masks get pretty heavy sometimes, and I'm not authentic. There's another book that we quoted in our book, and that's a book called Sacred Rest. It's a beautiful book by Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, and she talks about that.
Yeah. I've read that book, so I know, and I think, was she the first one that kind of coined soul care over self-care?
I am not really sure. That's kind of where David went, and that was probably from all the reading. He read 2 books a week. I don't know how he did it, but he
Wow.
read 2 books a week, and he would underline and take notes and key things. He'd say, "This is on page so-so in the front." So if I didn't have time to read a book, I'd just read his clip notes. But
Yeah. I've done that for my husband before too. If there's a book, like on trauma or something that I really wanted him to read, I'm like, at least read what I highlighted. Like,
yes, yeah, please, yes, I get it. I get it. I do the same thing.
it's so important. And that soul care is, for us caregivers, vital. for us to be able to stay regulated and calm, to be able to help our kids do that. So love that chapter as well. So the book is Caring for Kids from Hard Places, How to Help Children and Teens with a Traumatic Past. Again, I highly recommend it for every foster and adoptive parent, but also every church, children's ministry staff, volunteers, Christian schools, homeschool co-ops, anybody working with kids, right? So we want to make sure that, I highly recommend that, and urge our listeners to get a copy. Where can they pick up a copy of Caring for Kids from Hard Places?
Well, they can go on the Focus on the Family website, or they can go simply to Amazon. I don't know what other bookstores are still around anymore. I just usually refer people to Amazon. Barnes and Noble, I think, still have it online.
Yep.
They might have some storefronts, but yeah.
Yeah. Anywhere you buy books, you can grab a copy of this book. We highly recommend that you do, and get extra copies, right, for your children's Sunday school teacher and children's ministry leaders. Vital resource. So Jayne, as we wrap up, our listeners are primarily adoptive and foster parents and caregivers. So let's end with some words of encouragement. Can you offer for those of us on this parenting journey?
Well, it's the hardest thing you've probably ever done. I was just talking to a group of foster parents the other night, and one brand new foster mom, she's been doing about 6 months, said, I didn't know it was going to be this hard, but I'm not giving up. So I think that you keep showing up, keep plowing. You don't give up. You don't quit. If you feel like you need to quit, get someone to help you. Get some support. Connect with one another. I believe that the strongest thing families can do is connect with other adoptive families who can help support them. So there is hope. Our son is 57. There is hope. So he's adopted at 16 in the foster care system. And so I just said, don't give up.
Yeah. Wonderful words. Stay the course, persevere. Our kids depend on us to do that for them too.
Do.
So yeah. So Jayne, thank you so much for writing this book and providing this vital resource. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great joy and delight. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, wasn't that a great conversation with Jayne Schooler? I hope that you were encouraged by our conversation, and I do highly recommend her book. I devoured it as soon as I saw that it was available. I ordered it, I devoured it, and I just firmly believe that every church, I said it all through the episode. We need to equip our children's ministry leaders, our volunteers, people who are working with our kids. Everybody needs this book. And it will be such a vital resource. So I hope you'll check that out. Again, we're here to encourage you and equip you for your parenting journey. I'm on this journey with you, still raising 2 young adults that we adopted who have fetal alcohol syndrome. Passionate about providing resources for parents and caregivers, resources I wish I had all those many years ago, and that I rely on now even. So I hope that you'll find those resources here. Again, we have the FASD support group. We have workshops online. I travel and speak in person. I will be in January. I will be in Florida for the Seize the Connection retreat. I'm the keynote speaker there. So I do travel and speak and teach and write. So I hope that you will check out all of the resources that we have, especially the FASD resources, on our website, justicefororphansny.org. Follow us on social media. Justice for Orphans has an Instagram and a Facebook page. And I myself, Sandra Flach, am on both of those platforms. You can find me there as well. So I hope that you'll reach out and connect. And I am grateful to have you along on this journey. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans. And check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.